The judge's laughter hit the courtroom like a slap. It started as a soft chuckle, the kind people used when they believed they were safe, untouchable, above embarrassment. Then it grew. He leaned back in his high chair, shoulders shaking, eyes half closed, as if the sight in front of him was the funniest thing he had seen all week. Down by the defendant's table stood a woman in a faded navy dress and cheap flats, clutching a folder so tight her knuckles turned pale. She looked small under the bright ceiling lights. Her hair was pulled into a simple bun that didn't quite hold, and a loose strand kept falling into her face like it wanted to hide her. Her name was Leah Adeyemi, 29, a hospital records clerk with no fancy title, no expensive suit, no loud lawyer standing beside her. If you judged only by appearance, you would say she had made a mistake walking into this room. The gallery had already decided she was guilty. They had seen her picture online next to headlines that screamed, "Hospital employee linked to missing patient funds." They had watched commentators talk about greed and betrayal. They had heard the rumor that an old woman's life-saving surgery had been delayed because money went missing, and now Leah stood there alone, while people waited for her to break. Judge Victor Hawthorne tapped his pen and looked down at her like she was something stuck on his shoe. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said, drawing out the words, "do you understand where you are?" A few people in the back snickered. Leah swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor." "This is not a staff meeting," Hawthorne continued. "This is not the hospital canteen, where you can plead for sympathy. This is a court of law." He paused, letting the room soak it in, enjoying how the attention stayed on him. "You have chosen," he said, "to represent yourself." Leah nodded once. The judge's smile widened like he had been waiting for that. "So you are telling me," he said, "that you believe you can argue against trained counsel with—" He glanced down at her folder. "A file and hope." More laughter, louder this time. At the prosecutor's table, a sharply dressed man adjusted his cufflinks like he was on stage. That was Gregory Voss, an influential corporate lawyer hired by the hospital's board to protect the institution. He wore confidence like perfume. Behind him, sitting in the front row with a calm face and a costly watch, was Malcolm Kersey, the chairman of the hospital board. Powerful, well-connected, the kind of man who never queued anywhere. Leah's ally, her older cousin Daniel, sat behind her. Daniel's jaw was clenched so hard it looked painful. He was a community health advocate, not a lawyer, but he had begged her to let him speak. She had refused, because Leah knew this wasn't only about speaking. It was about proving. And everyone in the room thought she came with nothing. But Leah didn't flinch at the laughter. She didn't argue with the judge. She simply opened her folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and placed it carefully on the table. Then she looked up and said quietly, "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to make a formal application." The laughter faded into curious murmurs. Judge Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. "An application?" "Yes," Leah said. "To admit my preliminary disclosure and request that the court order the hospital to produce the full audit trail from its financial software, the server access logs from the records department, and the unedited CCTV footage from the billing corridor for the dates listed here." Gregory Voss chuckled under his breath, like he couldn't help himself. The judge leaned forward. "And on what legal basis are you making this request, Ms. Adeyemi? Please do not tell me you saw it on the internet." Leah's voice stayed steady. "On the basis of disclosure obligations in civil proceedings and the court's inherent power to order production of documents necessary for a fair hearing." The room shifted, just slightly, because that sentence did not sound like something a frightened records clerk should say. Judge Hawthorne's smile faltered for half a second. Then he covered it with another laugh. "You learned at a weekend." Leah held his gaze. "I learned it the hard way." One detail changed everything, but the judge did not realize it yet. Hawthorne waved a hand as if swatting a fly. "Denied," he said quickly. "This is not a fishing expedition. We are not here to entertain fantasies." Leah didn't protest. She simply nodded, as if she expected that answer, and turned a page in her folder. "Then I request," she said, "that the court allows a brief demonstration. 5 minutes. To show why this is not a fantasy. Gregory Voss leaned forward. Your Honor, this is ridiculous. She is delaying. The facts are simple. Funds were diverted from the patient care account, and the access credentials used belong to the defendant. We have the internal report. Malcolm Kersey sat back, eyes half-lidded, as if bored. Judge Hawthorne's eyes hardened. Ms. Adeyemi, you are not here to run a show. Leah's hands trembled for the first time, but she kept her voice calm. I am here to stop an innocent person from being destroyed. At that, the judge laughed again, louder, almost offended by the confidence in her words. Innocent, he repeated, amused. You do understand that you are accused of diverting money meant for patients. Real patients. People who suffer. Leah nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. Then explain, Hawthorne said, spreading his hands, why your login credentials accessed the billing system at 11:42 p.m. on March 3rd and approved a transfer. Leah took a breath. Because whoever did it wanted it to look like me. The courtroom murmured again. A few people rolled their eyes. Judge Hawthorne's laugh turned sharp. Conspiracy, he said. Of course. It's always a conspiracy. Leah's cousin Daniel gripped the bench behind her. He wanted to stand up and shout, but Leah had told him earlier, if you speak, they will dismiss us as noise. So he stayed silent. Leah lifted her folder. Your Honor, may I approach? The judge hesitated, then nodded with visible impatience. Leah walked to the center, and for the first time, everyone saw how carefully she carried herself, like she had practiced walking into fire without letting it show on her face. She held up a printed timeline. This is a timeline of March 3rd, Leah said, turning slightly so the judge and the lawyers could see. At 9:10 p.m., the hospital's charity gala ended. At 9:40 p.m., the board members, including Mr. Kersey, held a private meeting in the executive lounge. At 10:05 p.m., the hospital's internal auditor tried to access the billing software remotely and failed 3 times. Gregory Voss frowned. Where did you get that? Leah didn't look at him. At 10:16 p.m., a new administrative user was created on the billing system. At 10:21 p.m., the security camera outside the billing corridor went offline. The room went quiet. Judge Hawthorne's pen stopped tapping. Leah continued, voice stronger now. At 11:42 p.m., the transfer was approved. At 11:50 p.m., the security camera came back online. At 12:03 a.m., my credentials were used to print a transfer confirmation from a terminal that is not in my department. Gregory Voss leaned in. Objection. Speculation. Leah turned, and for the first time, her eyes cut through him like a blade. Not speculation, she said. Record. The word hung there. Record. But then the system pushed back, fast. Judge Hawthorne's face tightened. Ms. Adeyemi, he said, you are dangerously close to making allegations of criminal conduct without proper foundation. If you continue, I will have you removed for contempt. A ripple ran through the gallery. People leaned forward, hungry for drama. Leah felt the threat like cold water poured down her back. She had expected resistance, but not this quickly, not this direct. Gregory Voss smiled slightly, as if the judge had just done him a favor. Malcolm Kersey watched Leah with a polite, distant expression. He looked like a man observing an insect trying to climb a wall. Leah forced her hands to stop shaking. Your Honor, she said, I am not asking the court to accept my words. I am asking the court to accept evidence. Judge Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. What evidence? Leah reached into her folder and pulled out a small sealed envelope. It looked ordinary, brown paper, taped shut, her signature across the seal. The hospital's internal report, Leah said, was given to the press before I was even questioned. But this envelope contains something the report did not include. Gregory Voss's smile faded. Your Honor, we have no idea what that is. Leah held the envelope higher. Chain of custody, she said. Sealed. Signed. Witnessed. The judge stared at it like it offended him. Leah's voice softened for one moment. My mentor taught me, she said. that facts don't shout. They wait. The room didn't laugh this time. Judge Hawthorne's expression turned wary. Who is your mentor? Leah's throat tightened. She almost didn't answer, because the name carried weight, and weight was dangerous in a room like this. But she said it anyway. Justice Eleanor Marlowe. Leah said quietly. A few heads turned. People whispered. Justice Marlowe had been a respected judge years ago, known for discipline, fairness, and an unusual hatred for corruption. She had retired suddenly after a scandal no one could fully explain. Judge Hawthorne scoffed. That is convenient. Leah nodded. I expected you to say that. Then she placed the envelope on the clerk's desk. Inside, she said, is a USB drive. It contains server access logs, creation records of the new administrative user, and the unedited CCTV footage, copied automatically to a backup system the hospital forgot existed. A low murmur spread across the room. Malcolm Kersey's posture shifted, just slightly, but Leah saw it. One detail changed everything, and it was written all over his face. Gregory Voss stood. Your Honor, this is improper. She is attempting to introduce digital materials with no verification. It could be fabricated. Leah didn't argue. That is why I am also requesting a neutral verification. Judge Hawthorne tapped his pen again, slower now. Neutral verification. Leah nodded. A digital forensics analyst. Someone the court trusts. The judge's eyes flicked to Gregory Voss, then back to Leah. He didn't like losing control of the room. He didn't like surprises. But the courtroom was watching now. And judges, even arrogant ones, hated looking afraid. Fine, Hawthorne said sharply. The court will call an independent expert. But understand me, Ms. Adeyemi. If this is a stunt, you will regret it. Leah nodded once. I understand. And for the first time, the laughter was gone. The neutral expert arrived 2 days later. Her name was Dr. Mira Holt, a digital forensics analyst appointed through the court's registry. Calm, precise, and impossible to intimidate. She wore a plain suit, carried a secured laptop, and spoke like a person who measured every word before releasing it. The courtroom was full again, even more than before. Word spread that the records clerk had brought a secret USB. Leah stood at the defendant's table, still in her simple dress, still looking like the least powerful person in the room. But now, people looked at her differently. Judge Hawthorne entered and sat down with forced authority. Proceed, he said, like he was eager, like he hadn't been unsettled. Dr. Holt took the USB from the court clerk, documented the seal, photographed it, and logged the transfer. Her movements were clean and formal. This is how evidence becomes truth, Leah thought. Gregory Voss watched with tight control. Malcolm Kersey sat with folded hands, face smooth. Dr. Holt connected the drive to her secure system. I will verify metadata, creation times, and integrity checks, she said. If the files have been altered, it will be detectable. The room held its breath. Leah stared at the expert's hands, willing them to move faster, even though she knew rushing could ruin everything. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about Amina Saeed. Amina was the person at risk, the woman whose surgery had been delayed. Amina had been the public face of the tragedy. A widow, a mother, blamed for losing money meant for her care. People had called her greedy for asking questions, like a desperate person should be grateful for crumbs. When the hospital's funds vanished, Amina became a weapon in someone else's story. Leah had seen Amina cry quietly in the records office, embarrassed to beg, ashamed to be seen struggling. That memory was Leah's fuel. Dr. Holt looked up. The CCTV file on this device is consistent with a direct export from the hospital's camera system, she said. No signs of editing. A sharp inhale moved through the room. Gregory Voss stood instantly. Your Honor. Dr. Holt continued calmly. The server access logs show remote login from an administrative workstation at 10:16 p.m. The new user created was named ADM, Support 2. This creation record is signed by a supervisor account linked to the executive IT dashboard. Leah kept her face still, but inside her chest, her heart pounded like a drum. because the executive IT dashboard was not something Leah could access. Only board-level accounts could authorize it. Dr. Holt clicked again, and the CCTV footage played on the courtroom monitor. It showed the billing corridor, quiet, empty. Then, at 10:20 p.m., the camera feed froze for a second and went black. A message appeared. Signal lost. Then it resumed at 11:50 p.m., but in the background, reflected faintly in a glass panel, there was movement. Dr. Holt paused and zoomed. A figure stood near the billing terminal. Not Leah. Taller, wearing a suit. The figure leaned in, typed quickly, then stepped back. Leah's cousin Daniel let out a small sound, half shock, half relief. Judge Hawthorne's face drained of color. Gregory Voss's eyes widened, then narrowed, like he was calculating his next move. Malcolm Kersey didn't move, not outwardly, but Leah saw the twitch in his jaw. One detail changed everything, and now they couldn't laugh it away. Gregory Voss recovered first. "Your Honor," he said loudly, "even if this footage is real, it does not prove my client's involvement. That reflection is unclear, and we still have the hospital's internal report showing that Ms. Adeyemi's credentials approved the transfer." Leah stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said, "may I respond?" Judge Hawthorne hesitated. He looked like a man standing on thin ice, pretending it was solid. "Briefly," he snapped. Leah turned to Dr. Holt. "Dr. Holt," Leah said, "did you check whether my credentials were used for my assigned terminal?" Dr. Holt nodded. "Yes. The transfer approval was issued from Terminal B-14. Leah lifted another page. Terminal B-14 is located in the billing corridor, not in records. It is also configured to allow administrative overrides without two-factor authentication when the system is set to maintenance mode. A murmur. Gregory Voss snapped. "How would she know that?" Leah didn't blink. "Because someone turned on maintenance mode that night," she said, "and because I spent 6 months learning how the hospital systems really work." She took a breath, and her voice softened into something that sounded like a confession. 6 months earlier, Leah had been sitting in a quiet apartment with an old laptop that barely worked. On her wall were printed pages covered in notes, procedures, rules, definitions, everything she could find about evidence, disclosure, and digital logs. Justice Eleanor Marlowe had taught Leah when Leah was younger, not in a classroom, but in small moments. A judge who once stopped Leah in a courthouse hallway and said, "You are quiet, but you are listening. Don't waste that." Years later, when Leah's younger brother had been falsely accused of theft at his job and lost everything before the truth came out, Leah had promised herself she would never again let someone be crushed just because they looked weak. Then, Justice Marlowe had been pushed out of the system in disgrace, and Leah had watched a good woman vanish under gossip. Before Marlowe disappeared completely, she had called Leah to her house and said, "The system does not fear loud people. It fears prepared people. Promise me you will become prepared." Leah had promised, and when the hospital tried to sacrifice Leah to protect its image, that promise turned into a plan. But then the antagonist counterattacked. Gregory Voss stood with a new confidence, like a man pulling a hidden knife. "Your Honor," he said, "if the court is going to entertain surprise evidence, then we have surprise evidence too." He held up his phone. "This is an audio recording," he said, "from the defendant herself. A confession." The courtroom erupted into whispers. Judge Hawthorne blinked. "A confession." "Yes," Voss said, voice smooth. "In this recording, Ms. Adeyemi admits she used her access to manipulate billing records. It was sent anonymously to the board." Leah felt her stomach drop, because she knew what this was. A weapon. And weapons didn't need to be true. They only needed to be loud. Judge Hawthorne looked almost relieved, like he had been waiting for something to restore his power. "Play it," he ordered. The audio filled the room. It sounded like Leah. It used her tone, her rhythm, even her small pauses. "I did it," the voice said. "I accessed the system. I moved the funds. They deserved it." Gasps. A few people hissed under their breath. Leah's cousin Daniel whispered, That's not you. But the voice was convincing. Gregory Voss smiled faintly, letting the damage spread. Judge Hawthorne turned to Leah with a hard, satisfied look. "Ms. Adeyemi," he said. "Care to explain?" Leah lifted her chin. "Yes," she said. "That recording is fake." Laughter tried to return, nervous and cruel. Judge Hawthorne's mouth curled. "Of course it is." Leah didn't look at him. She looked at Dr. Holt. "Dr. Holt," Leah said, "can you analyze that audio file for edits, splicing, and artificial generation patterns?" Gregory Voss's smile flickered. "Your Honor, this is—" Judge Hawthorne raised a hand, but his eyes stayed locked on Leah now, like he was trapped in a fight he didn't choose. "Do it," he said. Dr. Holt accepted the file through the court clerk, ran it through her tools, and examined its waveform. The courtroom waited. Leah stared at the screen, forcing her face to remain calm, while fear tried to climb into her throat. Because if the expert couldn't prove it was fake, Leah's entire case could collapse. Dr. Holt spoke after a long minute. "This audio contains irregular compression artifacts inconsistent with the single continuous recording," she said. "The frequency signature shifts abruptly in multiple places, suggesting splicing." Gregory Voss's face tightened. Dr. Holt continued. "Additionally, certain phoneme transitions show synthetic blending patterns. In plain terms, this audio appears to be generated or heavily altered." A wave of shock rolled through the room. Judge Hawthorne's eyes widened. Gregory Voss stood as if to argue, but his words didn't come fast enough, because the room had heard the truth. But then Leah pushed deeper. "Your Honor," Leah said, "the question now is not whether I stole money. It is who had the resources to fabricate evidence and interfere with hospital systems." Malcolm Kersey's eyes sharpened. Gregory Voss snapped. "Objection. She is accusing without proof." Leah nodded. "Then let me offer proof." She reached into her folder again. "Last week," Leah said, "I received a sealed affidavit from someone inside the hospital's procurement office." The courtroom stilled, like it could sense something heavy approaching. Leah handed the document to the court clerk. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward, face tense. "Who is it from?" Leah's voice stayed calm. "From the hospital's deputy procurement manager, Olivia Chen." A murmur. That was a real name, a real person. Someone people knew. Gregory Voss's posture stiffened. Leah continued. "She states that Malcolm Kersey directed her to approve vendor contracts through a shell supplier that inflated billing and redirected funds into private accounts. She also states that when an internal auditor questioned the discrepancies, the auditor was pressured to stop." Malcolm Kersey finally moved. He stood slowly, voice controlled but edged. "This is nonsense." Leah turned to him, eyes steady. "Then why did she leave the country yesterday?" Silence. "Because that was a detail no one expected." Judge Hawthorne's mouth opened slightly. "What?" Leah nodded. "Olivia Chen filed the affidavit, then left under legal counsel. But she also left something else." Leah lifted her phone, but didn't play anything herself. She handed it to the clerk. "A recorded statement," Leah said. "Time-stamped. Filed." Judge Hawthorne looked like he didn't want to hear it, but he also couldn't refuse in front of everyone now. The recorded statement played. Olivia's voice filled the room, shaking but clear. She explained how Kersey's network used hospital contracts to move money, how the missing patient funds were only the surface, and how Leah had been chosen as the scapegoat because she had access, but no power. She described the night the CCTV went offline, the new admin account created, the maintenance mode activated. She said one sentence that made the air feel thin. "I saw Judge Hawthorne at the hospital that night," Olivia said, "in the executive lounge." Judge Hawthorne froze. The courtroom erupted, but the judge slammed his gavel, shouting for order, his voice cracking. Gregory Voss looked stunned, like even he hadn't expected that. Malcolm Kersey's calm face finally cracked. "This is a setup," he snapped. "A lie." Leah stood still, because she had expected him to say that too. But then Dr. Holt added quietly, "Your Honor, The server access log also shows a login from a device registered to the hospital's executive lounge network at the exact time the admin user was created. Judge Hawthorne's hands trembled slightly on the bench. He was trapped. The authority who mocked Leah, who threatened to remove her, who laughed at her, was now being named in the evidence. But then the decision came, and it landed like thunder. Judge Hawthorne swallowed hard, eyes darting across the courtroom as if searching for an escape that wasn't there. "This court," he said, voice strained, "orders an immediate suspension of proceedings against Ms. Adeyemi, pending a full criminal investigation. The matter is referred to the appropriate enforcement and judicial oversight bodies." Leah didn't breathe for a second. Then the words reached her. Suspension. Investigation. Not guilty spoken aloud, not yet, but the first crack in the lie that had tried to swallow her. Amina Saeed, sitting quietly in the back row with a scarf over her hair, covered her mouth and cried silently. Malcolm Kersey shouted, "You can't do this." Judge Hawthorne's voice rose, desperate now. "I can and I have." Security moved toward Kersey, not to arrest him, but to control the chaos as reporters pushed forward. Gregory Voss gathered his papers too quickly, like a man trying to leave before the room could turn its eyes fully on him. Leah stood still, feeling the courtroom spin around her. She had walked in as a joke. Now she was the storm. But then the bigger hook surfaced, darker than anyone expected. As the courtroom emptied, Dr. Holt approached Leah, quietly. "There's something else," Dr. Holt said in a low voice. "Your USB contained more than you mentioned." Leah's pulse jumped. "What do you mean?" Dr. Holt lowered her voice further. "There are repeated patterns in the logs. Not just this hospital. Similar admin user creation events, similar camera outages, similar transfer approvals. It looks like a template." Leah stared at her. "A template for framing people." Dr. Holt nodded once. "And it points to more than one institution." Leah felt cold, because she had thought this was one corrupt board chairman, but it sounded like a network. And networks didn't die when one man was exposed. They adapted. They retaliated. But then the aftermath came fast, and it came with teeth. Overnight, Leah became a name people argued about. Some called her brave. Others called her a troublemaker. Talk shows questioned her motives. Social media dug into her past, searching for anything to twist. The hospital issued statements. The board denied everything. People who had laughed in court now pretended they had always believed her. And behind the noise, the pressure became personal. Leah's landlord got anonymous complaints. Daniel received threatening messages. Amina was approached by strangers offering her money to stop talking. Leah found her apartment door scratched one morning, a silent warning. Daniel begged her, "Leah, you've done enough. Let the investigators handle it." Leah looked at him and shook her head. "Investigators follow trails," she said, "but someone has to keep the trail from being erased." That night, Leah opened an old notebook Justice Marlowe had once given her. On the first page were 5 words written in firm handwriting. "Prepared people terrify corrupt systems." Leah stared at the words until her eyes burned. Then she made a decision. She would stop fighting like an outsider. She would enter the system properly, officially, trained and certified, so no one could ever again laugh her out of a courtroom. She enrolled in law school. She worked during the day and studied at night. She learned procedures until they felt like muscle memory. She learned evidence rules until she could recite them in her sleep. She learned how power moved, how it hid, how it protected itself. Years passed. Some people from that hospital case went to court. Some deals were made quietly. Some names never appeared in public, even when whispers said they should have. Justice Marlowe died before she could see the full outcome, but Leah visited her grave once and placed the old notebook on the grass, just for a moment, like an offering. "I'm still keeping the promise," Leah whispered, but then the epilogue arrived, and it closed the circle with a cruel kind of beauty. 10 years after the day Judge Hawthorne left, the same courthouse hosted a special tribunal hearing. It wasn't a normal trial. It was an oversight hearing into judicial misconduct and systemic corruption, public, formal, and packed with officials, press, and security. Judge Victor Hawthorne sat at a table this time, not on the bench. He looked older, smaller. His confidence had cracks now, the way stone cracks after too many winters. He kept his eyes down as lawyers read out allegations. Abuse of authority, interference in evidence, conflicts of interest. And then the room rose, because a panel entered. At the center of that panel walked a woman in a dark robe. Her posture was calm, her steps measured, her face composed with the quiet strength of someone who had survived mockery and returned with authority. Leah Adeyemi. No faded dress, no trembling hands, no lonely folder. She took her seat at the front, and the clerk announced her title clearly, formally, like a bell that couldn't be ignored. Justice Leah Adeyemi, Supreme Court. The room went still. Judge Hawthorne's head lifted slowly, as if his neck resisted. His eyes found her. Recognition hit him like a physical blow, because now he remembered the woman he had laughed at, the woman he had threatened to remove, the woman he had treated like a joke. Leah looked at him with no anger on her face, only certainty. She opened a file, glanced at the first page, and spoke in a voice that carried through the courtroom without needing to shout. "Judge Hawthorne," she said, "do you understand where you are?" A sound moved through the gallery, half shock, half disbelief. Hawthorne swallowed, his mouth dry. "Yes," he rasped. Leah tilted her head slightly, not cruel, not mocking, simply precise. "This is not a stage," she said. "This is accountability." She paused, letting the silence do its work. Then she delivered the line that ended the circle, the line that turned the past into a verdict. "Last time you laughed at an innocent woman," Leah said, eye steady on him. "You thought the system belonged to you." She leaned forward, voice calm and final. "Today, you will learn it belongs to the law."